Sometimes the strongest man in the room is the one who can no longer stand, and the kindest person is the only one willing to stay. The third floor of the Romano estate had been silent for nearly 6 months. Housekeepers cleaned every hallway except one. Nurses accepted generous salaries only to resign within days. Physical therapists came and went with polite excuses, and even longtime employees lowered their voices whenever they walked past the heavy walnut door at the end of the corridor. Behind that door lived Nathaniel Romano, the man newspapers once called the most powerful businessman in Chicago, and the man whispered about as a mafia boss whose influence reached every corner of the city. Now he spent his days inside a wheelchair, hidden from the world that had once followed his every step. No one spoke about what had changed him. No one dared ask why the room remained locked from sunrise until long after sunset. They only knew one thing. He refused help from everyone. On a gray Monday morning, rain drifted softly against the tall windows of the mansion while the head housekeeper gathered the staff inside the service kitchen. Her expression carried the exhaustion of someone who had delivered the same impossible request too many times. "Mr. Romano needs assistance with his morning care," she said quietly. The room fell completely still. Several employees lowered their eyes toward the tiled floor. One attendant suddenly remembered another assignment downstairs. Another quietly shook her head before anyone could call her name. No one wanted to enter that room. It was not because they feared cruelty. It was because they feared witnessing a proud man forced to depend on strangers. Then a gentle voice broke the silence. "I will help him." Every head turned at once. Amara Johnson, the newest black maid in the mansion, stood near the back of the room holding a basket of freshly folded towels. She had worked at the estate for only 4 days. Her black housekeeping dress was simple, her white apron neatly pressed, and her natural curls were tied into a clean bun. Her calm brown eyes revealed neither fear nor hesitation. The head housekeeper stared at her in disbelief. "Do you understand what that means?" she asked carefully. Amara nodded. "It means someone should not have to face another morning alone." The older woman hesitated before handing her a small brass key. "No one has stayed longer than 10 minutes, she whispered. "If he asks you to leave, leave immediately." Amara thanked her softly, gathered fresh towels, warm washcloths, clean clothes, and a basin of comfortably warm water before walking toward the 3rd floor. Every footstep echoed across polished marble hallways lined with priceless paintings and towering windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a museum where time itself had stopped moving. At the end of the corridor, she reached the locked walnut door. Her heartbeat quickened. She took one slow breath, lifted her hand, and knocked gently. No answer came. She waited several seconds before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The room was spacious yet strangely empty, filled with morning light filtering through partially opened curtains. Bookshelves covered one wall. A fireplace sat cold beneath an elegant portrait. Beside the window, facing the rain instead of the room, sat Nathaniel Romano in his wheelchair. His broad shoulders remained straight despite months of isolation. His charcoal sweater fit neatly over an athletic frame that life had unexpectedly slowed but not diminished. Without turning toward her, he spoke in a calm voice stripped of warmth. "Leave." Amara remained where she was. She did not step closer. She did not pity him. She simply answered with quiet respect. "Good morning, sir. I brought warm water because everyone deserves to begin the day with dignity." For the first time in many months, the silence inside that room did not feel empty. It felt as though something long forgotten had quietly knocked on the door of a guarded heart. Amara did not move closer after his command. She simply placed the folded towels on a polished wooden chair beside the door and rested the basin of warm water on a small table near the fireplace. Steam drifted gently into the cool morning air, carrying the faint scent of clean linen and cedar soap. She kept her hands folded in front of her apron and waited. Nathaniel remained facing the rain beyond the window, convinced that, like everyone before her, she would quietly leave after a few uncomfortable moments. Instead, the room settled into an unfamiliar silence that did not demand anything from him. Nearly a full minute passed before he finally spoke again. "You are still here." His voice was calm but distant. "Yes, sir," Amara answered. "You asked me to leave, but you did not ask me why I came." Nathaniel slowly turned his wheelchair just enough to see her for the first time. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps in her late 20s, with gentle eyes that reflected neither fear nor pity. That surprised him more than he cared to admit. Most people looked at the wheelchair before they looked at him. Others forced cheerful smiles that felt rehearsed. Amara did neither. She simply looked at him as though he were another human being beginning another ordinary morning. "Why did you come?" he asked. "Because someone trusted me with today's work," she replied. "And because everyone deserves to be treated with respect, especially on the days they do not feel strong." Nathaniel studied her quietly. There was no trace of performance in her words. She was not trying to impress him. She believed what she was saying. Outside, rain continued to fall across the gardens surrounding the Romano estate. Inside, the warmth from the untouched basin slowly filled the room. "You are new," Nathaniel observed. "For days, sir. Most people spend 4 days learning which rooms to avoid." Amara smiled softly. "I spent 4 days learning the names of the kitchen staff instead." The corner of Nathaniel's mouth almost reacted before he quickly looked away. It had been months since anyone had answered him without nervousness or flattery. "Tell me something," he said after another pause. "Were you told to feel sorry for me?" Amara shook her head immediately. "No, sir." "Do you?" she answered without hesitation. "No." Nathaniel looked back toward her, genuinely surprised. "Why not?" Amara took a careful breath before speaking. "Because needing help is not the same as losing dignity. My mother cared for my grandfather for 3 years after he became too weak to live alone. He still gave the best advice in our family. He still made everyone laugh. The chair he sat in never defined the man he was." Nathaniel lowered his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him that way since the accident that changed his life. Everyone else discussed treatments, schedules, medications, or limitations. Amara spoke about dignity. The words settled into the room with unexpected weight. She walked slowly toward the window, stopping several feet away so that his personal space remained untouched. "The water will cool if we wait too long," she said gently. "If today is not the right day, I understand. I can return tomorrow. My job is not to rush you. My job is to make sure you know someone will come back." Nathaniel remained silent for several long moments. Then, without looking directly at her, he quietly released the brake on his wheelchair and turned it a few inches toward the waiting basin. It was the smallest movement imaginable, almost invisible to anyone else. But inside the Romano estate, it was the first time in 6 months that Nathaniel Romano had chosen to move toward another person instead of away from them. Amara moved with quiet confidence, never rushing, never pretending the moment was ordinary, yet never allowing it to become embarrassing. She wheeled the small table closer before testing the temperature of the water with the inside of her wrist exactly as she had watched her mother do years earlier. "Please let me know if it becomes uncomfortable," she said softly. Nathaniel gave no reply, but he also did not tell her to leave. For him, that silence was already a decision. Sunlight slowly pushed through the rain clouds outside, filling the room with pale morning light that reflected across polished hardwood floors and shelves lined with leather-bound books. The mansion felt less like a fortress than it had an hour earlier. Amara carefully laid a fresh towel across a nearby chair before stepping back once again. She never reached toward him without permission. She waited. Nathaniel noticed that detail immediately. Every professional caregiver before her had assumed efficiency mattered more than dignity. They explained procedures while already moving his wheelchair, adjusting blankets, or organizing supplies around him. Amara asked with her eyes before she acted with her hands. It was such a small difference that most people would never notice, yet to Nathaniel it felt enormous. Finally, he broke the silence. "Who taught you to do this?" Amara smiled gently. "Life did, sir." Nathaniel looked at her with quiet curiosity. She continued arranging clean towels before answering more fully. "My grandfather spent the last years of his life needing help after an illness. My mother always reminded me that we were not taking care of a patient. We were taking care of the same man who had once carried us on his shoulders." Nathaniel lowered his gaze toward his own hands resting on the wheelchair armrests. Strong hands. Hands that had once signed contracts worth millions of dollars, built businesses, opened community centers, and shaken the hands of governors and judges. Now they remained perfectly still. Amara noticed his expression but chose not to comment. Instead, she quietly opened the curtains a little farther, allowing warm daylight to replace the grayness that had settled inside the room for months. Would you like more sunlight? She asked. Nathaniel hesitated before giving a nearly invisible nod. She adjusted the curtains without another word. As the room brightened, she noticed a small framed photograph resting on the bookshelf beside the window. It showed a smiling woman standing beside a much younger Nathaniel during what appeared to be a summer afternoon near Lake Michigan. Neither of them looked at the camera. They were laughing together. Amara never asked who the woman was. She simply dusted the frame gently with the corner of a clean cloth before placing it back exactly where it had been. Nathaniel watched every movement. Most employees ignored the photograph completely. Others stared too long before pretending they had not noticed it. Amara treated it with the same quiet respect she showed every object in the room. You did not ask about the picture, Nathaniel observed. If you want me to know, you will tell me someday, Amara answered. If you do not, then it belongs to your memories, not my curiosity. Something shifted behind Nathaniel's composed expression. The walls he had carefully built over months of isolation did not collapse all at once, but one small stone quietly loosened. As Amara finished preparing everything, she looked toward him with the same calm smile she had worn since entering the room. Whenever you are ready, sir. Nathaniel looked at the warm basin, then at the patient young woman who had entered his life only 4 days after joining the estate, and for the first time since the accident, he realized he was no longer measuring another person by what they could do for him. He was measuring them by how completely they allowed him to remain himself. The quiet understanding between them changed the room in ways neither of them could explain. Without another word, Nathaniel slowly released the brake on his wheelchair and guided himself toward the prepared chair beside the warm basin. The movement was deliberate, careful, and entirely his own. Amara did not rush forward to help. She remained where she was until he looked up and gave the smallest nod of permission. Only then did she step closer. Thank you, she said softly. I will tell you what I am doing before I do anything. If you would like me to stop at any time, you only have to say so. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment before quietly replying. No one has ever said that to me. Amara unfolded a fresh towel and placed it neatly within reach. Everyone deserves a choice, sir. She poured a little warm water over a clean washcloth and tested the temperature once more before offering it to him. Would you like to wash your hands yourself first? Nathaniel accepted the cloth without hesitation. The simple question surprised him. Every caregiver before her had assumed he wanted someone else to complete every task. Amara assumed he wanted to do whatever he still could. The difference settled deeply inside him. As he slowly washed his hands, his eyes drifted toward the rain that had finally stopped outside the tall windows. Sunlight now reflected across the gardens, and for the first time in months, he noticed birds returning to the fountain below. The weather changes quickly here, Amara said as she refreshed the basin with warm water. Nathaniel almost smiled. Chicago has never been patient. Neither has life, she answered gently. The conversation ended there, but it no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. As she carefully prepared another clean towel, Amara noticed a small wooden music box resting on the bookshelf beside the family photograph she had dusted earlier. The lid was slightly open, revealing delicate craftsmanship worn smooth with age. She admired it for only a second before turning away, respecting his privacy. Nathaniel noticed. You looked at it, he said quietly. It is beautiful, Amara replied. Someone must have loved it very much. Nathaniel remained silent before finally speaking. My wife gave it to me on our first anniversary. Amara did not offer sympathy. She did not apologize for his loss. She simply listened. She used to open it every Sunday morning while making coffee, Nathaniel continued. After she was gone, I could never bring myself to wind it again. The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock above the fireplace. Amara carefully folded another towel before speaking. Some memories hurt because they mattered. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. Those words carried no advice, no attempt to fix what could not be repaired. They simply made space for grief without allowing it to become shame. A gentle knock interrupted the stillness. The estate manager stepped inside, carrying several folders. He froze the moment he saw Nathaniel calmly sitting beside the basin instead of facing the window. His eyes widened with quiet disbelief. Sir, he said cautiously, your board meeting begins in 30 minutes. Nathaniel looked toward the folders and then back at Amara, who quietly continued arranging fresh linens as though nothing extraordinary had happened. For the first time since withdrawing from public life, he gave an answer no one inside the Romano estate expected to hear. "Tell them I will attend." The estate manager stared at him in complete silence before slowly nodding. As the door closed again, Nathaniel looked toward Amara with an expression that had been absent from his face for many months. It was not confidence yet. It was something even more fragile. It was hope. From that morning forward, something almost impossible began happening inside the Romano estate. The third floor was no longer the place employees hurried past with lowered eyes. It became the one hallway where quiet hope slowly returned. Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, Amara carried fresh towels, clean clothes, and warm water to Nathaniel's room. Every morning she knocked before entering. Every morning she waited for permission. Those simple routines never changed, and perhaps that was why they mattered so much. Nathaniel gradually discovered that dignity could survive inside consistency. Amara never treated him like a burden to be managed or a patient to be pitied. She treated him as the owner of every decision concerning his own life. If he wished to complete a task himself, she stepped back. If he requested assistance, she offered it without making him feel incapable. Days turned into weeks, and conversations that once lasted only a few words slowly became longer. They spoke about books, architecture, Chicago winters, and the view of Lake Michigan outside the window. They never spoke about sympathy. One quiet afternoon, while organizing a cabinet beneath the bookshelf, Amara discovered a small wooden box tucked carefully behind several leather albums. She reached for it only because it had fallen sideways and might become damaged. Before opening it, she looked toward Nathaniel. "Would you like me to place this back where I found it?" she asked. Nathaniel remained silent for a moment before answering. "You may open it." Inside rested dozens of handwritten letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. Every envelope had been addressed by different families from across the country. Some contained children's drawings made with colored pencils. Others held photographs of smiling boys and girls standing beside hospital beds, graduation stages, playgrounds, and baseball fields. Amara carefully unfolded the first letter. A mother thanked an anonymous donor whose generosity had paid for her daughter's heart surgery. Another letter came from the parents of a little boy who had received specialized rehabilitation equipment after an accident. A third thanked someone for funding a scholarship that allowed a teenager with a physical disability to attend college. None of the letters mentioned Nathaniel by name, yet every receipt tucked between the pages carried the Romano Foundation seal. Amara slowly looked up from the box. "You helped all of these families." Nathaniel kept his eyes on the rain drifting beyond the windows. "No," he answered quietly. "I simply removed obstacles that never should have existed." Amara continued reading several more letters, each one filled with gratitude, hope, and second chances. She closed the final envelope with great care before placing everything exactly as she had found it. "No one knows," she whispered. Nathaniel smiled faintly without looking at her. That was always the point. She understood then why the newspapers had never written those stories. The world knew the powerful businessman, the wealthy philanthropist, and the feared mafia boss, but very few people knew the quiet man who believed generosity should never become a performance. Amara looked at him differently after that afternoon, not because she admired his influence, but because she finally understood the loneliness carried by someone who had spent years giving without expecting recognition. As she gently closed the wooden box, Nathaniel spoke again in a voice softer than she had ever heard. "Do you know what frightened me most after the accident?" Amara slowly shook her head. Nathaniel rested his hands lightly upon the wheelchair. "It was never losing the ability to walk. It was believing I could no longer be useful to anyone." The room fell silent once again. Amara stepped closer, meeting his eyes with calm certainty. "The people who wrote these letters answered that question long before you asked it, sir. Sometimes the greatest gift a person leaves behind is hope, and hope never depends on whether someone is standing or sitting." The following Monday brought a quiet surprise that no one inside the Romano estate expected. Nathaniel attended the board meeting exactly as he had promised. The conference room overlooking downtown Chicago had remained empty of its owner for nearly half a year, and the executives waiting around the long walnut table exchanged uncertain glances when they heard the soft sound of wheelchair wheels approaching from the hallway. Nathaniel entered wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his posture straight and composed, not because his circumstances had changed overnight, but because something far more important had changed within him. The room fell completely silent as every executive slowly rose to greet him. Some smiled with genuine relief. Others simply stared, amazed that the man they feared had returned, yet unable to understand what had made the difference. Nathaniel noticed every expression but acknowledged none of them. Instead, he calmly opened the meeting by discussing the community foundation, employee benefits, and several hospital partnerships that had been delayed during his absence. His voice carried the same quiet authority it always had, but there was a new warmth beneath it that even longtime advisors recognized immediately. When the meeting concluded nearly 2 hours later, the estate manager approached him outside the conference room. "Sir," he said carefully, "everyone is asking what changed your mind." Nathaniel glanced toward the large windows overlooking Lake Michigan before answering. "Someone reminded me that accepting help does not erase who I am." He offered no further explanation. Back at the estate that afternoon, Amara was quietly organizing fresh linens inside the laundry room when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to find the head housekeeper smiling in a way she had never seen before. "Mr. Romano attended his first meeting today," the older woman said softly. "The staff has not seen that happen in months." Amara smiled with quiet happiness, but simply returned to folding towels. "I am glad," she replied. "He made that choice himself." The head housekeeper studied her thoughtfully before walking away, realizing that Amara had never claimed credit for any of the changes taking place inside the mansion. Later that evening, Amara entered Nathaniel's room carrying fresh towels as usual. Nothing about her routine had changed. She knocked. She waited. She entered only after hearing his permission. Nathaniel was seated beside the window reading one of the handwritten letters from the wooden box. He carefully placed it back inside before looking toward her. "Do you know why I kept every one of these?" he asked. Amara gently shook her head while preparing the warm basin. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Because there were days when I needed proof that my life had mattered to someone." Amara paused for a moment before answering. "You kept the letters because they reminded you of the people you helped. They did not need your name to remember your kindness." Nathaniel looked at her with thoughtful eyes. "And who reminds you that your own life matters?" The question caught Amara completely by surprise. She lowered her eyes for a moment before quietly answering. "My mother always did." Her voice softened. "She has been very ill for almost a year. Some days she worries more about becoming a burden than about getting better." Nathaniel listened without interrupting. He asked no further questions. He simply nodded once, committing every word to memory. As Amara quietly continued her work, she never noticed the thoughtful expression settling across Nathaniel's face. Long after she left the room that evening, he remained beside the window looking out across the dark lake while the city lights shimmered in the distance. Then he reached for the telephone resting beside his desk and calmly asked his longtime attorney to arrive first thing the next morning with several confidential files. The attorney assumed the request concerned business. Nathaniel knew it had nothing to do with business at all. The next morning unfolded as quietly as every other morning inside the Romano estate, yet unseen decisions had already begun changing lives beyond its walls. Nathaniel completed his daily routine with the same calm patience that Amara had helped him rediscover. She prepared the warm water, arranged fresh towels, and spoke only when conversation came naturally. Nothing about her kindness had become routine because every gesture remained intentional. As she finished folding the last towel, Nathaniel looked toward her with thoughtful eyes. "You never asked for anything," he observed. Amara smiled gently while placing the neatly folded linens into a cabinet. "I already have work that I am grateful for, sir." Nathaniel studied her expression. "Everyone needs something." She hesitated for only a moment before answering honestly. "Perhaps, but I have learned that not every burden belongs in the workplace." Nathaniel nodded, respecting the boundary she had quietly established. He asked no more questions, yet her words remained with him long after she left the room. Later that afternoon, while Amara polished silver in the downstairs dining room, her cell phone vibrated inside the pocket of her apron. She stepped into the hallway before answering. The call came from the hospital where her mother had received treatment for nearly a year. Her heartbeat quickened as she expected another difficult update. Instead, the hospital administrator spoke with unexpected warmth. "Miss Johnson, I wanted to let you know that your mother's outstanding balance has been resolved." In addition, a specialized rehabilitation program has agreed to accept her beginning next week. Amara froze. I am sorry, she whispered. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, the administrator replied kindly. An anonymous benefactor requested complete privacy. All arrangements have already been finalized. Tears slowly filled Amara's eyes. She thanked the woman repeatedly before ending the call. She leaned gently against the hallway wall, trying to understand what had just happened. Nothing in her life had prepared her for unexpected generosity. That evening she visited her mother after work. The small rehabilitation room felt brighter than it had in months. Her mother smiled as soon as Amara entered. The doctors said I may finally begin the new therapy, she said with hopeful eyes. Someone must have been praying very hard. Amara squeezed her mother's hand and smiled through tears. Maybe they were. She never mentioned the anonymous donor because she truly did not know who it could be. Across the city, inside his private study, Nathaniel quietly reviewed documents brought by his attorney earlier that morning. Medical approvals, rehabilitation schedules, transportation arrangements, and financial confirmations rested neatly organized across the mahogany desk. The attorney looked at him curiously. Would you like Miss Johnson to know where this came from? Nathaniel slowly closed the folder. No. She will probably spend months trying to discover who helped her. Nathaniel looked toward the rain beginning to fall outside the window. Then let her spend those months believing that kindness still exists in the world without expecting applause. The attorney smiled faintly before gathering the remaining papers. After he left, Nathaniel remained alone with the familiar wooden box of letters resting beside his chair. He gently opened it and reread one message from a grateful family whose child had once received a second chance through anonymous generosity. For the first time since his accident, he realized that Amara had unknowingly given him something far greater than confidence. She had reminded him that his greatest strength had never been his ability to stand. It had always been his ability to quietly lift someone else when they believed no one was watching. Several weeks passed, and the quiet changes inside the Romano estate slowly reached beyond its walls. Nathaniel no longer isolated himself behind the locked door on the third floor. Each morning he asked to be wheeled into the sunroom overlooking Lake Michigan, where the first light reflected across the water and warmed the polished stone terrace. The household staff noticed the difference immediately. The owner, who had once hidden from every conversation, now greeted employees by name, asked about their families, and listened without checking the time. No one understood what had brought him back to life, but everyone felt the difference. Amara continued her routine exactly as before. She never acted as though she had accomplished something extraordinary. She still arrived before sunrise, folded fresh towels with careful precision, prepared warm water, and knocked gently before entering Nathaniel's room. To her, kindness did not become more valuable simply because someone important received it. One crisp autumn morning, Nathaniel asked if she would accompany him to the foundation headquarters downtown after his medical appointment. Amara looked surprised. Sir, I am only part of the housekeeping staff. Nathaniel smiled quietly. Today I need someone who reminds me why this foundation exists. She accepted with respectful hesitation. The foundation occupied the top floor of a modern glass building overlooking the Chicago River. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows onto photographs of children, veterans, and families whose lives had been transformed through anonymous grants. As Nathaniel moved through the offices in his wheelchair, employees welcomed him with genuine smiles. Amara remained a respectful distance behind, admiring the warmth that filled every room. During a meeting with the foundation directors, Nathaniel asked for the annual report. Together they reviewed hundreds of completed projects, but one proposal remained unfinished. It described a rehabilitation center designed specifically for families who could not afford long-term physical therapy after serious illnesses or injuries. Funding had stalled months earlier during Nathaniel's absence. He quietly closed the folder and looked around the room. Approve it today, he said calmly. No family should lose hope because treatment arrives too late. Every director nodded without hesitation. As the meeting ended, Nathaniel asked everyone else to leave except Amara. The conference room became silent once more. He placed the rehabilitation proposal gently on the table between them. Do you know why I wanted you here? He asked. Amara slowly shook her head. Nathaniel rested his hands lightly upon the folder. Because you reminded me that healing begins long before medicine. It begins when someone feels respected. Amara lowered her eyes, humbled by his words. I only tried to treat you the way I hoped someone would treat my own family. Nathaniel answered with quiet conviction. That is exactly why you changed mine. Before they left the building, he stopped beside the large window overlooking the city skyline. Countless people hurried along the sidewalks below, each carrying unseen burdens of their own. Nathaniel watched them for a long moment before speaking almost to himself. For months I believed my life had become smaller because I needed help. Now I understand something different. Sometimes the people who help us do not restore our strength. They restore our purpose. Amara looked toward the city bathed in late afternoon sunlight and smiled softly, never realizing that Nathaniel had already made one final decision that would soon transform not only her future, but the future of countless families she had never met. Nearly 1 year later, spring sunlight poured through the glass walls of the Romano Community Rehabilitation Center as children laughed in the courtyard and families filled the bright lobby with conversations that sounded like hope returning home. The building had once existed only as an unfinished proposal resting inside a forgotten folder. Now it stood overlooking Lake Michigan, welcoming every patient regardless of financial circumstances. Physical therapists greeted veterans, nurses guided elderly couples through recovery programs, and volunteers helped children practice their first confident steps after months of treatment. Above the entrance hung a simple bronze plaque bearing only one sentence. Every person deserves dignity while healing. Nathaniel Romano arrived that morning wearing a tailored navy suit, his wheelchair moving smoothly across the polished floor as staff members greeted him with genuine smiles instead of fearful silence. He had become a familiar presence inside the center, attending board meetings, speaking with families, and listening far more than he talked. His wheelchair no longer represented what he had lost. It reminded everyone of the purpose he had reclaimed. Across the lobby, Amara Johnson welcomed new patients while wearing a professional cream-colored blazer instead of her old housekeeping uniform. Months earlier, Nathaniel had quietly asked her to leave the household staff and become director of patient care for the foundation. She had accepted only after insisting that she earn the position through training rather than gratitude. Nathaniel had admired that answer more than any business proposal he had ever received. Together they walked through the rehabilitation center, stopping often to greet families whose lives had been transformed by programs once hidden inside confidential files. In one therapy room, Amara's mother smiled as she completed another successful rehabilitation session, stronger than anyone had believed possible a year earlier. She embraced her daughter before turning toward Nathaniel with grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathaniel gently shook his head. "Thank your daughter. She reminded me why people need hope more than pride." Later that afternoon, reporters gathered inside the main atrium to celebrate the opening of a new pediatric recovery wing. Cameras flashed as community leaders praised the foundation's work, expecting Nathaniel to stand alone at the podium. Instead, he invited Amara to stand beside him. The room grew quiet. Nathaniel looked across the audience before speaking with the same calm voice that had once guided powerful boardrooms. Many people believe strength is measured by how independent we remain. I believed that for far too long. Then someone walked into my life without fear, without judgment, and without trying to rescue me. She simply treated me with dignity. Everything this foundation becomes from this day forward is built upon that lesson. The audience rose together in warm applause, but Amara lowered her eyes with quiet humility, just as she had on her first morning inside the Romano estate. She had never sought recognition. Nathaniel noticed and smiled. Some people changed the world by making speeches. Others changed it by carrying warm water into a silent room and reminding a lonely man that accepting kindness did not diminish his worth. As evening settled over Chicago, golden sunlight reflected across Lake Michigan while the rehabilitation center continued welcoming families through its open doors. Nathaniel watched children playing in the gardens outside, and Amara stood beside him without saying a word because none was needed. In that peaceful silence, both understood the same enduring truth. The strongest hands are not always the ones that can lift the greatest weight. They are the hands that protect another person's dignity when the world has forgotten how.